AP left a note and a present for me on my wedding day. I, 27M, met my wife, 26F, during a company event we both attended. Susan was my everything, being tall, blonde, athletic, and as smart as anyone I knew. We worked in different departments of our company that didn't mix very often. The company's 4th of July barbecue was the best day ever. I spent some time with my boss's boss during this event as we sat at the same table. We chatted, and he eventually asked me about my thoughts on our team and what I believed could be done to improve our process. I was careful in my responses, but honest with him on some areas that needed improvement, and even some missing training for our team to be more effective. He seemed genuinely engaged, and my feedback was well received. Susan was also sitting at our table across from me, and she was intently listening in on our conversation and even added her perspective in some instances. As I said, she was the full package. We became fast friends at the barbecue, and she looked me up in the company roster and emailed me when we were back from holiday. This led to us going to lunch and hanging out after work with colleagues. Susan was about a year into her single life after she caught her ex-boyfriend cheating on her with one of her friends. Susan had chosen to leave him because of obvious reasons that come with cheating partners. I had bounced from relationship to relationship for a few years without anything sticking for over a few months. None of them were toxic or bad, just a lack of a real connection. It took us dating for a year before I proposed, and Susan eagerly accepted. She was ecstatic about being engaged and started planning our wedding. She asked if I had any feelings on the date, and I told her to feel free to pick one as I didn't have a preference. Susan opted for a fall wedding that gave us about 6 months to plan. Wedding planning went extremely well with no drama. Susan had already been thinking about her dream wedding. There were so many people at the wedding that I didn't know half of them. She chose a big venue at a coastal resort and invited almost everyone we knew and our extended families. Her parents were well off and wanted her to have her dream wedding. My parents wanted to help, so they paid for the honeymoon. We had booked the honeymoon suite at the resort hotel for 2 days, starting one day before the wedding, so Susan could get some spa time and be treated in style leading up to the wedding. I had made reservations at another resort in Wailea with a beachfront view for our honeymoon, and the plane was to leave the following afternoon. On our wedding day, her mom told me that Susan was feeling a lot of pre-wedding anxiety, which made me nervous. Her mother assured me she was fine and that every bride feels like this. The wedding itself was amazing, and everything went off without a hitch. We read our wedding vows to each other, with Susan so full of emotion that she stopped twice because she was crying. We were pronounced as man and wife and kissed. The rest of the afternoon was a whirlwind of activities with the reception, and I only saw Susan briefly a couple of times for pictures and cake cutting. In one of the few quiet moments after the wedding service, I escaped to the lobby, grabbed my suitcase, and headed to the suite to drop it off. Susan was still busy socializing with our guests. When I entered, a couple of champagne glasses sat on the counter, with an empty bottle with a post-it note stuck to it. The note read, "We've been sharing Susan for 6 months. You might want to check the bed. Congratulations on your wedding." Stunned at the note, I walked into the bedroom, finding the bed was unmade, and sitting in the center of it was a small square wrapper with the corner torn off. Next to the wrapper, fully on display, was a used condom. I stood there looking at it, completely disgusted and in shock. I picked up the hotel phone, called guest services, and asked when the room had been cleaned. I was told cleaning had been denied that morning, but they would happily send someone up if needed. As I was standing there trying to decide what I was going to do, I got a text from my mom asking me where I was and telling me that I was needed in the reception for formal pictures with the guests. I told her that I'd be there shortly. I opened my suitcase, pulled out the Ziploc baggie I had my toiletries in, and emptied them into my suitcase. I walked into the bathroom and got some tissue, so I didn't have to touch it with my fingers. I took out my camera, took some pictures of the offending items, and sent them to my dad with the caption, "Found this on my bed. Looks like Susan started without me." I placed it and the wrapper into the baggie. Within a minute, my dad texted me back, saying not to do anything and that he'd be there in a few minutes. I sat down on a stool in the kitchen and waited for him. My mind seemed to run 100 miles an hour, but was completely blank. Yes, I was mad, but I'm not a person who loses my temper and lashes out. When my dad got to the room, he asked me to explain what was happening. I walked him through everything from when I came into the room. I showed him the dirty champagne glasses, empty bottle, and note. Then I walked him into the bedroom and showed him the bed. Then I gave him the Ziploc with the offending condom and wrapper. I explained that I called the cleaning service, and they told me that the room cleaning for today had been canceled that morning. I told him that Susan's mom had said she had been having anxiety attacks since this morning. My dad asked me what I wanted to do, so I told him I would see what Susan had to say. He warned me not to make any accusations. I told him that I wouldn't. I took the baggie and put the bottle of champagne with the note and glasses in it, then walked to the reception with my dad. When we arrived, my mom was annoyed and started to say something when my dad pulled her off to the side and started talking to her in a low voice. I could see her body language change and tell she was shocked. She came over to me, hugging me. Mom asked me if I was sure of this, so I handed her the bag holding the empty bottle of champagne and the 2 glasses. She looked into the bag skeptically, and I handed her the note and showed her the Ziploc. Finally, I said, "This was on the bed." After glancing at the baggie and reading the note, she went pale and looked sick. I told her I believed she was having an affair and that this was some sort of revenge by the guy. Mom just looked at me and handed the bag back to me with a sad and angry expression. We were standing in an area with tables that weren't in use, and my dad said he would get Susan and her parents. Mom and I sat at a round table with 6 chairs around it, away from the rest of the guests. My best man walked up to me with a big smile and gave me another congratulatory hug. He could sense there was a problem and asked what was happening. My mom took him by the hand, walked him away from the table, and started talking to him. He was instantly angry, and I heard him drop an F-bomb loud enough for people around to look at him. He nodded and turned away from the table but stood between us and the rest of the room. Mom returned and sat beside me, saying that Brandon would ensure nobody bothered us while we talked. Dad also returned with Susan and her parents, Susan's maid of honor Jess tagging along. Brandon reached out and touched her arm as she passed, and said something to her that made her stop and turn to him. Brandon spoke to her quietly as everyone sat at the table. My dad had taken the other seat next to me, so Susan was forced to sit across from me. Susan's mom asked what this was about, and my dad simply told her that a family emergency required us to make some decisions. Everyone looked at me when he turned and told me to proceed. I opened the bag and took out the champagne bottle and glasses as everyone watched. After setting them in the middle of the table, I told everyone that I was able to sneak away to get my stuff from the front desk and bring it to our room. Then I told them that when I entered the room, they were sitting on the counter in the kitchen. Susan's mom looked at them and said, "Okay, what of it?" I turned and looked at Susan and said, "The hotel cleaning service said they were turned away while you were out eating this morning." Susan was staring at the glasses. Then I asked her, "Who was in there that told the cleaning crew to skip our room?" Susan's mom instantly sprang to Susan's defense, saying, "Are you accusing my daughter of something?" Then continued, "Are you insinuating something because you found an empty bottle and 2 glasses in the room?" She was getting angry. I just looked at Susan, who was still staring at the champagne glasses. I then placed the note on the table and said, "This was on the bottle." Susan's mom reached out, took the note, and read it. Her face blanched. I pulled out the Ziploc and held it up for everyone. The condom in the baggie was completely on display, and there was no doubt what it was, even without the telltale yellow helmet on it. As I held it up, Susan's mom gasped in shock. Then I said, "This was left for me on the bed." Looking at Susan, whose eyes were on the condom, mouth hanging open with a stunned expression. I said to Susan's mom, "I'm simply asking who Susan was effing in our room the night before our wedding." Susan kind of staggered to her feet, screaming something like, "No, no, no, I can explain." Then her eyes rolled up in her head and she collapsed onto the table and slid to the floor before her dad could catch her. Chaos ensued, with people running to help Susan. She was fine, and her dad picked her up and carried her to another room. Her mother followed her while I and my parents watched. Jess approached me to ask what had happened. I simply told her I had gone to the room and found evidence she had had a guy stay with her in the room last night, holding up the Ziploc with the used condom. Jess looked at me with big eyes and blurted out that she had told Susan not to talk to that a-hole. When I asked her who she meant, Jess said that Susan's ex had shown up at the hotel yesterday begging to talk to her. It seems Susan met with him later to talk, which seemed to end up with more than talking. I handed the note to Jess, and she started crying after reading it. Jess asked what I was going to do. I looked at her without even pausing and said, "Well, the first thing I'm going to do is get wasted and then have the marriage annulled." Brandon rounded up the groomsmen, and we all left the resort to the nearest strip club we could find. I spent my honeymoon night getting hammered with my best friends. My mom and dad stayed to talk to Susan's parents and let them know I was leaving the venue. Susan's dad said very little that night, but did apologize to my dad in private. He told him there were no words for what Susan had done and apologized profusely for her actions. My dad told him I had mentioned an annulment, and Susan's dad broke down. Susan's mom could be heard yelling at Susan and a lot of crying going on. Brandon and Jess took it upon themselves to let people know that the reception was being cut short and apologized for the inconvenience. I made it to the airport in time for my flight to Maui, barely. I decided that it would be a great place to just not be around anyone. Social media was afire with what had happened, and Brandon and Jess were clear that I hadn't done anything wrong. They didn't say what happened, wanting to leave that to me. I was told Susan closed her social media accounts. I spent the week going everywhere I could, taking selfies and pictures and posting them. I never mentioned Susan in my posts. I admit that the first few days were really bad for me, but I was feeling surprisingly good by the end of the trip. I don't pretend to say I was good, but the mental anguish was way better, and I didn't feel like throwing up every time I thought of Susan. I went by the apartment I shared with Susan when I got home. All of her stuff was gone, but she left everything that wasn't an important personal possession. The apartment was still fully furnished, except for an antique china cabinet that she got from her grandma's estate. There was a note from Susan saying she was sorry for what she had done and loved me. It had a new telephone number written on the bottom of the page. I sent her a single text message to the number with a list of items I did not want, asking if she wanted to come and get them or if I should dispose of everything. I didn't want any of the furniture that we purchased together. She responded that she would make arrangements to have her dad get everything. He stopped by with his truck the next day after work, and I helped him load it. I gave him a hug before he left, and he told me he wished me the very best in life. I went down to the county courthouse and filed the paperwork for annulment. In the aftermath, it did get out that Susan had cheated on me the night before the wedding with her ex. She was blasted hard enough online that she deleted her social media accounts and even changed her phone number. Her dad kept in touch with my dad, they were fishing buddies, and said that Susan had been a wreck emotionally and had been seeing a psychologist. She's not playing around with a counselor, and she actually had some sort of mental break after the annulment was granted. She quit her job since many of our friends were at the wedding and actually worked for the same company. Her mom finally apologized to my mom. My mom took the high road and accepted the apology. Our parents were very good friends before the wedding. Her mom asked how I was doing and if she believed I would ever forgive Susan. My mom said that I was fine, but ignored the last part of the question. I'm doing well. My boss left the company for a different job, and I was promoted to his position. I'm happy and still have my friends. I'm not certain about my personal life, as it just still seems so unreal that Susan cheated on me on our wedding day. Jess contacted me a few months later and gave me Susan's side of what had happened. Her old BF heard of our wedding and did his best to sabotage it. He succeeded and hoped to jump back into her life. Susan said that he'd been contacting her since the engagement, but she had not seen him before that night. She told Jess she had nothing to hide because we were already separated, and I wasn't speaking to her. She said she was having anxiety, and he was there chipping away at her until she finally gave in to him. He was angry after they were together because Susan said she broke down over what she did. She claims that her ex expected her to run off with him, and when she told him no, he took his revenge on her with the note and incriminating evidence he left for me. She vehemently denies anything over the last 6 months, aside from him texting her and her telling him she was happy and not interested. Do I believe that? It doesn't matter, because she let him into our room and opened her legs to him. I wish I could tell you how she begged for forgiveness and everything people talk about cheaters doing, but she didn't. She did apologize, and she took full responsibility without blaming me for anything. She has contacted me from time to time, checking in on me, and I get birthday and Christmas cards. Jess said she still stays in contact with her, but their friendship took a pretty serious hit because people think Jess should have stopped her somehow. I don't blame Jess at all. I don't wish this on anyone, ever. I only post new and unique stories. Please like and subscribe.